Hello and welcome to this lecture on Chapter 7. Today we'll be talking about content creation and sharing when we do either blogging, streaming, video, podcasts, or webinars. So we're going to talk a little bit about each and hopefully explain what you can do with each and how it can be used in your social media marketing. So there's a lot to cover here, and so here's an outline of what you should be thinking about as we go through this chapter, and it all ties back to that social media marketing and your strategy. We'll look at a little bit about the history, explain some definitions if you're not already familiar with them in terms of what is a blog, what's a webinar, those sort of things. We'll continue on here. We'll also look at what is a podcast, how do you create them, how do you share them, how do you use them for your marketing and so on, and how that's different from a webinar. And then we'll look at some best practices of the different types of applications that we can use here. So basically what we're going to be doing here is looking at see how we can use audio and video as part of our social marketing tools, if you will, in order to achieve some goal. And that goes back to whatever your strategy is. Again, your goal might be to increase sales, it might be to get a list of potential new customers, it might be to distribute information about your product, or just be brand awareness or product awareness. It just sort of depends, and these are the sort of applications, technologies, if you will, that we could use to get that information out to those potential customers. So if we go back and think about what we've learned so far, we're going to need to have some kind of strategy. And that strategy means we're going to be thinking about what the creation of this content should be and who that's going to be targeted toward. So we need to know our audience, and we need to know those personas of our audience so we can identify where they're located and identify similar people who have the same persona. And also keep in mind that we're talking about content strategy here. So what is it that we need to put into our marketing, so to speak? Then we got to think about the dissemination component. And so this is where how we're going to get it out, what are the appropriate channels to achieve our objectives, if you will. So the channels might be where people subscribe to a podcast, or they might see advertising for a webinar and go ahead and sign up. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. And the last thing in terms of whatever our strategy is, again, we're going to have to come back and think, okay, how do we define success? So we need to have a measurement of that success, and then we analyze that and determine if this is the appropriate way to achieve whatever our goals are. Is it the right type of technology that we're using, and so on. So as we continue with our content strategy, you need to ask yourself what subject areas will interest the members of who you're trying to target, or your audience. And so how does this content that you're creating reinforce your brand image or your story? And basically, what is it that you're trying to achieve? How does this content, it's going to be some kind of audio or video or texting, if you will, especially if you're doing a blogger. And you may have to use multiple channels in order to get your message out. So you need to be thinking about which ones are appropriate, which ones aren't appropriate, and you need to develop a story that can be told across all different types of channels. Now, you may have to modify the content as you change channels, but the story should still be there. So here's the figure that your book refers to. Again, it's just a strategy. You come up with a strategy. What's your story of your brand? You develop some content for that. You send it out towards your audience through different channels. In our case here for content, the channels might be the web, if you're doing a web page, might be some kind of text for email. You might also think about breaking that down and doing a mobile communication where it goes on those devices like your iPhones or smartphones, I should say, versus a web interface or a web channel, which is more for maybe a laptop or a desktop of some type. The next thing I want to discuss is the being too specific in your content. And so your book suggests that the best strategy here is that you want to find a niche market and be as specific as possible in that market. And so now you're going to be targeting a smaller area, not going after everybody that might be in this target. And so you're looking for very specific types of attributes that'll give you that niche market. So if you're using some form of text or emailing, so you might be a blogger, and so you want to think about, if you're going after a niche market, then think about special interests. And so instead of targeting a very large market, go after the smaller one. And that way you're likely to find a lot of people that would fit into that smaller market, and then you can use that to build brand awareness or whatever your goals are. And so, another thing to keep in mind then is that you want to be able to create content that could go across several different channels. So maybe you're a blogger, but you also want to do webinars that go along with that, and that'll be on a different channel. You might want to do some podcasts, that'll be on a different channel. But it's all about what content are you going to produce, for which channels, and then how's that going to help you achieve your goals. Also want to explain what your book talks about as the long tail. So the long tail is, if you look at, let's say, your content or whatever you're trying to sell, typically you want to go after that audience that would be your average. And so then as you go out to the right on your distribution, the number of people that might fit whatever you're looking for gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the long tail is out in there. If you could identify that niche market, you might be able to build a greater following than just going after the average. And so the example of that would be, let's say Netflix. Netflix could just market the most popular movies that are out there. But what they did is they found that if they found these obscure movies, there might be enough people that would like to watch them, and they would sign up for this service in order to find those different types of obscure movies. Those obscure movies are part of that long tail, that part of that niche where you're going after something that's not widely known, but there's enough people in that to make it profitable. So that's what they're talking about there. So continuing on here, after you've got your strategy and you know why you're doing something, you got to think about what media channel you're going to be using, and so you need to format your content for that media channel. You also need to think about what kind of commerce you're going to be doing. So keep in mind that your book says email works well for entrepreneurs and small businesses. If you're going to do business to business, then you might want to do some kind of white paper as terms of your content. Some people will sign up for a white paper, and then you've got their contact information then, and then they get the paper, and then they can determine if they want to find more information or want somebody to contact them for more information. And so if you're creating a website, doing mobile things, yeah, you need to understand things like quizzes work well for business to consumers. If you're doing pages, doing web pages, then you might want to put some testimonials on there. That works well for business to business type of commerce that you're doing. You also have to think about what platform you're going to be using. When we talk about platforms, examples might be a website, and so that's an overpaid type of platform. If you're using social network, that might be an earned type of platform, or through some kind of advertising, which is an owned media of some type. Then be sure you collect some metrics so that you understand who's reading your content, if you're reaching that audience or reaching that persona that you've identified. And then look at your goals, and your goals should support your brand strategy, if you will. So an example of brand strategy would be that if you want more people to view your content, then you're after brand awareness. And if you have an engagement objective, then you're wanting people to interact more with your content. So in that case, you may give them something so they can create their own content that revolves around the brand. You also need to think about how you're going to get people to share. And so one way to encourage sharing then is to use some kind of emotional or other trigger that's going to trigger a response in those people that are looking at your content, and hopefully that will get them to share it. So it might be funny, or it might be something that just really disgusts them, or it's an emotional tie-in, if you will. And then lastly, have a checklist. And that checklist means that you're going to ensure that your content is optimized for searching, depending on what kind of search engine where your content might be, and that it's going to help support the goals that you've decided for your content strategy. So the next thing we want to talk about is one area that you might be able to use, and that is to create a blog in order to meet your goals in terms of your content strategy. So a little history about blogs is that we have in 1994, this is around when the commercialized internet was coming into play, you have someone that was writing about video games and consoles. Then the word that's a web blog came about, web and log, and then that was shortened to blog. And so and blog is something where somebody just kind of writes things out about certain topics that are of interest to them, and then other people that are also interested in that topic come in there and read it. And so you can see this has expanded over time. As of 2015, there are about 400 million people per month that read blogs. They read them on something called WordPress. WordPress is a content management system. It deals with using different kinds of modules in order to create a website. And so it's rather easy to set up, and you then create your own blog. So it might be just a blog about your travel plans if you were doing this individually, and then your friends could read that. And, if you're going to create something like this, make sure that you're updating the content periodically. Maybe twice a month would be enough in order to keep people coming back. But if you don't update the content, then people will eventually think that you've abandoned your blogging site, and they won't come back and continue to read. So here we have some characteristics of a blog. Usually it's very easy to set up and it's free. You have search engines that can find it, depending on what people are looking for. There follow up with conversations about uh, whatever you're blogging. And so, like I said earlier, it's people that have similar interests. And once they find the topic, maybe they can spread that information faster than regular news, so it becomes very viral. It's syndicatable, meaning that viewers can easily subscribe. So your book talks about RSS feed and a real simple syndication. So there are places out there where you can sign up for a blog site, and it can actually be pumped into either a reader or into another website if that's what you want. Also with blogs, they need to be linkable to other blogs. So again, if you're running something like WordPress and you've used the modules for blogging, and then that gives you the capability of setting that up rather easily. So the next thing we want to talk about is how to set up a blog. So one thing is you could do a content management system that has an add-in to do a blog, if you will. So that creates a website for you, and it creates all the different things that you need in order to do the blog, and allows people to respond, so you can track that as well. Or you can go to a free site. A site that's run by Google would be blogger.com, and so I've actually got that up on the screen here, and so you can actually go there and create your own blog and start blogging away, and then they show you how you can use money by putting ads on your blog site and so on. Right, so, and it has more or less the things that we've been talking about. Know what your strategy is going to be, who your audience is, what kind of personas they have, where do they hang out, how you're going to target them, and so on. All right, so the main thing is, once you got that blog done, then the key is to come up with some kind of content that you can keep putting in there that keeps people coming back. And so I've seen, blogs can be done to build brand awareness. Blogs can be done. There's lots of political blogs, and people build a reputation around what they've written and how they view things and what's going on. Then there's the personal blogs, and so some people may put it out there, so it's kind of like a diary for themselves, so that maybe when their children are fully grown, they can go back and see this diary that their parents put out there for them. Or if you're doing travels, you might put a blog out there so people who are following you might get a sense of what you're doing every couple of days. And so again, it comes back to coming up with this compelling and relevant subject matter that you're going to put out there that keeps people coming back. So after your blog's created, then you got to figure out how you're going to promote it. And so one way to promote it then is to try and get people to request an email sign up. So you get a list of people who want to receive the content. So an example is what Huffington Post did. And so when you're receiving that content, you're pushing the content out. Now, what Huffington Post did is they actually got bloggers and used their content and used it for free. And so more or less they were writing content for the Huffington Post. And so by doing that, they were able to build a new business model, and people started reading that, and the reward for the people that were writing the blogs was that they got recognition. So I'm not sure that's a really good deal, but that's the way it turned out, that they didn't really have to pay those people to write the content for them. The people were willing to write it on their own. So I mentioned earlier that people can get a reputation for doing things through a blog. There's lots of people that write political blogs, and they're famous for that. Here we have an example of someone who became famous that was a corporate blogger. And so one of the things that made him famous is that he told the truth about Microsoft products, uh, and so people started following him because they felt he was very truthful and honest about that. So again, early on when we started talking about social media marketing, one of the things that you don't want to violate is your trust. Be honorable. Don't get caught telling a fib or a small lie, because that will end your site almost immediately. And so some other examples of corporate blogs that your book has in it is there's the Marriott International CEO had a blog where the CEO shared stories and information um, about Marriott. Um, and then who was reading that, something for employees to read. And so you could actually have a blog internally if you were in management, that if that was your target, you target people that are inside your organization, or you're okay if part of the people that are reading it are within your organization. Now, one of the reasons why this is mentioned is because that blog was then used in generating more than $5 million worth of revenue from bookings that originated from the blog. And so if you have a blog, there's ways to monetize it, that is, to make money from it. One thing you could do is you could put some advertising from AdSense on the web where your blog is being hosted. You could also have links to things you're talking about and see if you can generate revenue that way. In this case, there are links to the Marriott, and so people could then book directly from there. And so I'm going to pause here and create a break, and then when we come back, we'll finish the rest of the chapter.